The first days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine were hectic, with the invaders simultaneously attacking Kyiv, Kharkiv, the unoccupied portion of Donbass, Zaporizhia Oblast, and Kherson. Arguably, however, the biggest breakthrough that Russia achieved in the beginning of this war was the capture of Kherson. Despite President Putin's bold declaration that the city would be Russian forever, the Russian occupation of Kherson and the right bank of the Dnipro would last only months. In this video, we will tell the story that began in chaos and defeat, but culminated in the triumphal liberation of Kherson by the Ukrainian army. This video was sponsored by our kind YouTube members and patrons. Becoming a YouTube member or patron is the best way to support our work, so we're now providing our supporters with exclusive videos to thank them. Join their ranks to watch the Pacific War series, alongside the First Punic War, Sulla's biography, the Italian War of Unification, Risorgimento, the Russo-Japanese War, Albigensian Crusade, History of Prussia, and much more. 80 or so exclusive videos in total. In 2024, YouTube members and patrons will watch series on the Fall of Sparta, the Reconquista, Second Punic War, Spanish War of Succession, and Russian Civil War, and will continue getting early access to all videos, access to an exclusive Discord server, will know our schedule, and vote on future videos. YouTube member and patron support allows us to keep the majority of our videos free in a world where YouTube monetization income is very uneven. If you want to support our work, join their ranks today via the link in the description and pinned comment. Thank you. The Kremlin's initial plans for Ukraine were overly ambitious. Had it worked, they would have occupied the capital of Kyiv, all of Donbass and eastern Ukraine, the Dnipro Basin, and southern Ukraine, amounting to most of the country, sans its westernmost regions. One of the key strategic goals of the Russian army was to create a bridgehead on the right bank of the Dnipro, from where they could occupy Odesa and Mykolaiv. Coupled with the capture of Mariupol, these two developments would cut Ukraine's access to the Black Sea, making it a landlocked country. Control over Kherson was the first key component of this strategy. At the start of the war, Russia reportedly gathered about 85,000 troops in Crimea as a staging ground for the invasion of southern Ukraine. Reports that surface later indicate that the Ukrainian government was aware of the Russian preparations to invade Ukraine, but for several reasons their defensive preparations for the assault from Crimea were inadequate. There was no general mobilization, no fortifications, barricades and defensive structures were not erected, key bridges connecting Crimea to the rest of Ukraine were not blown up, and the territorial defense units were not sufficiently armed. Part of this was due to the unwillingness of the Ukrainian government to launch open preparations for war, for the fear of panic of the Ukrainian people and foreign investors. They were concerned that such preparations and acknowledgement that the war was about to start would cause panic in Ukrainian society. Part of it was simply due to poor decision-making in the south, which left the Ukrainian units defending it unprepared. The fact that the most skilled units and important equipment, including precious few air defense systems, were concentrated around Kyiv and in Donbass did not help either. On the morning of February 24, 2022, Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine after conducting a mass campaign of airstrikes to cripple the Ukrainian military. At 3:45 am, columns of Russian tanks, vehicles and men began their movement from Crimea through the Kalanchak border checkpoint. At 8:45 am, the Ukrainian border service released footage of another column moving through the Chonhar checkpoint. Ukraine failed to destroy the bridges connecting Ukraine to Crimea and establish effective defences along the narrow entrance points to prevent or at least delay the Russian advance. According to the military analyst Serhiy Grabsky, all in all, Russia had around 35,000 men advancing on the river Dnipro on the first day, opposed by around 15,000 troops from elements of the 59th Motorized Brigade, which were sent to check the Russian advance from Crimea, and the 80th Air Assault Brigade, which was sent from the Mykolaiv Oblast. A tank regiment of the 59th Brigade was deployed closer to Crimea a few days before the invasion, but it was undermanned and lacked equipment, and had to retreat under the overwhelming Russian force and air superiority. The senior lieutenant Yevhen Pelchenko recalls that his regiment was ordered to deploy to Sahivka, a village south of Novokakhovka on the intersection of some roads. But on the way to the village, he saw retreating Ukrainian units. By the time his regiment reached Sahivka, Russia had captured Novokakhovka and deployed airborne troops of the 7th VDV Division on the right bank of the Dnipro. In mere hours, the 42nd Guards Motor Rifle Division of the 58th Combined Arms Army advanced for more than 60 kilometers without facing meaningful resistance. Along with suffering losses from constant airstrikes, Ukrainian units had trouble communicating with each other due to effective electronic warfare by Russian units. Russia also secured the Antonivsky Bridge connecting the left and right bank of the Dnipro near Kherson. Some Ukrainian units, including Palchenko's regiment, were still on the left bank and were ordered to attack the Antonivsky Bridge and make their way to the right bank. By the morning of February 25th, the Ukrainians managed to break through to the right bank. This allowed Ukraine to save its troops from encirclement on the left bank of the Dnipro, but also meant that Russia had captured a vast area within a day. At this point, the Ukrainian army was in control of Kherson, but the Russian VDV forces were active on the right bank and controlled the Kherson International Airport. Ukraine was calling up reservists and creating territorial defense brigades. However, lack of weapons and poor command and communication continued causing problems. By March 1st, Kherson was practically encircled. Most of the Ukrainian units were ordered to withdraw to the Mykolaiv oblast to prepare for the next defensive battle. The remaining Ukrainian units and hundreds of volunteers, armed merely with automatic weapons and Molotov cocktails, tried to defend their city against overwhelming odds, but they were doomed. The symbol of this resistance was the battle in the Lilac Park, where dozens of volunteer Ukrainians were killed by overwhelming Russian force. On March 2nd, the Russians completed the capture of Kherson, the only regional capital city they have controlled in this war. The Ukrainian government is still investigating the causes of this rapid collapse of their southern defenses. After seizing Kherson, the next goal of the Russian army was to capture Mykolaiv. Even before the capture of Kherson was completely secured, elements of the 7th VDV Division and other Russian units advanced on Mykolaiv. According to Major General Dmytro Matchenko, who organized the defense of Mykolaiv, the Russians were supposed to complete the encirclement of Mykolaiv in 2 days by bypassing it from the north, then encircle Odesa within 3 days. They were not planning to enter the city. They intended to go through Bashtanka on Voznesensk to create a broad ring around Mykolaiv and then squeeze it to the boundaries of the city. They understood that we were going to destroy the Vavarivsky Bridge and planned to create 3 pontoon crossings. 2 battalion tactical groups were going to cross from each of the crossings in order to approach Odesa and ensure the deployment of the airborne forces. Marchenko also talked about a similar degree of disorganization and unpreparedness in Mykolaiv on the first days of the invasion, which were apparently solved quite quickly by his actions, fully supported by the governor of Mykolaiv, Vitaly Kim, one of the symbols of Ukrainian resistance in the first phase of the war. Elements of the 79th Airborne Brigade, bolstered by surviving units from Kherson, the police, National Guard and territorial defense groups, were there to defend Mykolaiv. At the time when the Ukrainian defenders had major problems with secure communication, Governor Kim solved this problem the old-fashioned way. He mobilized groups of spotters for each key road which the Russian units could have chosen to attack Mykolaiv from in order to inform soldiers. As early as February 26th, the forward units of the 7th VDV Division entered Mykolaiv proper, but were repulsed after a day of heavy fighting. In preparation for further assaults, the Ukrainian Special Forces destroyed 2 bridges into Mykolaiv and mined the 3rd one, essentially luring Russian forward units there. Again, the forward units of the 7th VDV Division were the group conducting the assault on Mykolaiv, and when on March 2nd they reached the bridge near Voznesensk, the bridge was blown up by the Ukrainian artillery, inflicting heavy casualties on the invading force. The remaining Russian columns were defeated in the style often used against the Russian military, which tends to advance in parade-like formations. Ukrainian anti-tank guns targeted the first and last vehicles in the column, creating chaos in the Russian ranks. The 80th Airborne Brigade completed the job, defeating the 7th VDV Division in the Battle of Voznesensk, lifting the threat of encirclement of Mykolaiv. According to Marchenko, when we pushed them back, it was a breaking moment for us, as we believed in ourselves, as fighters understood that they are resisting, that Russians are scared and have started running away. We started taking prisoners, capturing their equipment. Although the Russian army was still present in the Mykolaiv Oblast, their defeat near Voznesensk meant that their initial plan of a quick capture of Mykolaiv and then Odesa utterly failed. But still, there were Russian troops in the east of the city. On March 4th, they captured the Kulabykino airfield, but were quickly overrun by the Ukrainian artillery, and the airfield was retaken by the AFU. Another Russian attempt to advance into Mykolaiv, this time from the Mykolaiv International Airport on March 7th, was repelled as well. By mid-March, the Russian forces were mostly pushed back towards the Kherson Oblast. Despite heavy shelling by the Russians continuing for the next several months, there was no immediate threat to Mykolaiv and Odesa anymore. Ukraine had won the Battle of Mykolaiv. Soon the Russians withdrew from northern Ukraine as well, focusing solely on Donbass. By late June, Russia captured the Severodonetsk salient, which was the culmination of the initial phase of the war, while Ukraine received access to game-changing HIMARS artillery units from their Western allies. However, even before that, the Ukrainian army had started the methodical work of degrading Russian military infrastructure in right bank Kherson. Regular strikes on the Chornobaivka airfield, where the Russian command insisted on keeping some of its assets, became one of the most infamous memes of this war. On May 27th, the AFU launched an operation on the line between Andriivka and Davydiv Brid to create a bridgehead on the Russian-controlled bank of the river in Hulits. The 6th Tank Brigade and the 64th Mechanized Brigade successfully gained a foothold there, and even though they later lost control over the Davydiv Brid bridgehead, the Ukrainians managed to stand their ground around Andriivka. Next came a series of HIMARS strikes on the 3 bridges over the Dnipro, connecting to the Kherson Oblast, destroying or damaging all of them. This made the issue of supply of the Russian units on the right bank of the Dnipro extremely problematic. The Russian supply problem was exacerbated by a campaign of strikes on Russian military bases, ammunition and oil depots on the right bank, forcing the Russian command to remove them to the left bank of the Dnipro outside of HIMARS range. The pontoon crossings and pontoon ferries could only solve the supply problem to a certain extent. On July 9th, President Zelensky ordered the Ukrainian army to retake the right bank of the Dnipro, which prompted the Russian army to deploy units from the Kharkiv front to Kherson. For instance, British intelligence claimed that the elite 1st Guards tank army, trained to defend Moscow in case of war with NATO, was sent to Kherson. This helped the success of the lightning-quick Kharkiv counteroffensive, wherein the undermanned Russian units were routed in September. After setting the stage for the ground offensive by diminishing the Russian combat power on the right bank of the Dnipro and targeting their supply lines, on August 29th, the AFU launched a ground assault on 3 axes, along the M14 highway, from the Andriivka bridgehead, and in the Vysokopilya sector. The Ukrainian units made progress on each of them on the first day. Around Vysokopilya, the first line of the Russian defences was manned by the 109th, 113th and 125th DPR regiments, and was breached very fast. It was reported that the 60th Mechanized Brigade and the 108th Territorial Defence Brigade entered Arkhangelska and, according to some claims, encircled the 45th Guards Spetsnaz Brigade south of Vysokopilya. In early September, the 45th Brigade withdrew south and linked up with the 98th Guards Airborne Division, which led to the liberation of Vysokopilya, Olhinya and Novovoskresensk. In the Andriivka bridgehead, Ukrainian Marines liberated Suky Stavok and Kostromka on the first day of the counteroffensive, while in early September they took Blahodatna and Bilohirka. Here, the aim of the Ukrainian army was to expand the bridgehead along the river in Hulits and move along the T-2207 road. A Ukrainian success in this theatre would have separated Russian units fighting on the left bank of the Dnipro into 2 disconnected groups. The 3rd axis of advance along the M14 highway was the fastest, but also the most fortified route of advance on Kherson. There, the 28th Mechanized Brigade, the 59th Motorized Brigade and Territorial Defence units pushed back the 20th Guards Motor Rifle Division and elements of the 7th Guards Mountain Air Assault Division to gain ground in Pravdina, Posad Pokrovska, Zeleny High, Turnovy Pody, Blahodatna and Lyubomirivka in late August to early September. The Ukrainians also conducted regular HIMARS, artillery and scarce airstrikes to further weaken the Russian grouping, most importantly targeting bridges and pontoon crossings to prevent any supplies reaching the right bank of the Dnipro. Constant strikes on Russian artillery forced the Russian command to relocate some of it to the left bank of the Dnipro. The size of the Russian contingent on the right bank had been assessed to be somewhere between 20 and 30,000 men. Their units had no intention of sitting back in passive defense, as they conducted counterattacks to degrade Ukrainian forces and push them out of earlier captured positions, succeeding in some instances. Despite the notable progress of the Ukrainian army in the first 5 to 7 days of the Kherson counteroffensive, by mid-September, the Russians managed to stabilize the situation. On September 14th, they blew up a dam on the river Inholets near Kryvyi Rih, which was a further detriment for Ukrainian offensive operations, particularly in the Andriivka bridgehead. Kherson Oblast is primarily an agricultural region laying on open fields with low levels of vegetation. Lack of tree lines and urban infrastructure meant that any advance would not have enough cover, making it vulnerable to artillery. Hence, most of the fighting in Kherson Oblast was in the form of artillery battles. A very small percentage of casualties were from bullet wounds, since close combat was relatively rare during the Kherson counteroffensive. Intending to advance under these conditions, the Ukrainian command chose a sound strategy of gradual degradation of the Russian manpower and firepower on the occupied right bank of the Dnipro, being cognizant of the fact that the Russians would simply be unable to resupply its troops due to the logistical challenges. Ukraine was using the geographical situation to its advantage, and cautioned against expecting a blistering pace of its offensive. The Kherson counteroffensive was going to be a slow and methodical process. The only notable gains of the Ukrainian army in the second half of September were the liberation of Bezymena in the Andriivka bridgehead and Bilyivka in the Vysokopilya sector. On September 30th, Russia formally annexed the Kherson Oblast to Russia, along with several other regions of Ukraine, after conducting a sham referendum. Putin threatened the whole world with using nuclear weapons, but Ukraine called his bluff and continued attacking. On October 2nd, Ukraine started making major gains, which proved to be the turning point of the Battle of Kherson. The Ukrainians liberated Arkhangelsk and Mykolaiv on this day, but their most important advance was along the Dnipro. The 60th Mechanized Brigade swiftly advanced from Zolota Balka to Mykolaiv on October 2nd and reached Dutchany by October 4th, taking advantage of the rotation of Russian units in the area. The disorganization of the Russian army in this area enabled a mechanized breakthrough for the AFU as it advanced for almost 30 kilometers in 2 to 3 days. Simultaneously, the Ukrainian naval infantry brigades attacked Davydiv Brid and after days of heavy fighting managed to liberate it, forcing the Russian army to conduct a major withdrawal. As a result, Velika Alexandrivka, Mala Alexandrivka, Trifonivka, Novovoskresenska and several other villages came under Ukrainian control. More importantly, the Ukrainian offensive from the Vysokopilya and Zolota Balka sectors linked up with the Andriivka bridgehead axis. Now the Russians were defending a narrower front line on the right bank, and for a while they once again stabilized the situation. But since they were unable to solve their logistical issues, their control over the right bank became increasingly untenable, as the AFU continued degrading their forces by constant artillery and HIMARS attacks. The Russian occupation administration relocated to the left bank, while the Russian military commander in Ukraine, Sergei Surovikin, warned about difficult decisions that they may have to make in Kherson. This difficult decision came only a month later. Throughout the first days of November, the Russians were removing their military assets from the right bank as the fighting raged there. As they were defending a narrower front line, they managed to prevent the Ukrainian army from advancing rapidly, enabling the Russians to withdraw in an orderly manner. On November 9th, the Ukrainian army liberated Snihirivka. This was followed by a televised meeting between the Russian Defense Minister Shoigu, the commander of the Russian army in Ukraine, Surovikin, and other members of the Russian military command, where Surovikin reported about a difficult situation on the right bank, suggesting a withdrawal to the left bank. Shoigu agreed. The Russian forces started their retreat. They blew up bridges in the process, preventing a rapid advance by the Ukrainian army in order to avoid encirclement. Some of the equipment was left behind to be captured by the Ukrainians, but in general it was an orderly withdrawal. On November 11th, the AFU raised the Ukrainian flag in Kherson, completing its victory in the Battle of Kherson, or the Battle of Bridges as some call it. The autumn of 2022 has been Ukraine's most successful period in this war. They liberated the Kharkiv Oblast and the right bank of the Dnipro in a matter of several months. Both were massive victories, which raised hopes for a complete victory of Ukraine in this war, eventually leading to further significant, albeit late, military supplies from its Western allies. Ukraine's victory in Kherson remains the last major territorial advance by either side as of October 2023. Despite losing the battle, the Russians managed to avoid a collapse and withdrew from the right bank in a relatively orderly manner. This enabled the Russian army to use units and assets it had on the right bank on other fronts. We will continue to cover the Russo-Ukrainian War as more developments occur. To ensure you do not miss that, make sure you are subscribed and press the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.